My name is Dina Rosenberg, and this is my mother's story. My mother happened to be from Berlin, which is the capital of Germany, and that's where she lived the first 15 years of her life until she had to leave. And she, thankfully, Baruch Hashem, got out on the Kindertransport. Before I explain that, I just want to remind you guys, you've heard of tyrants who have tried to harm the Jewish people, going all the way back to Paro, which, you learned during Parsha Shavua. In order for people to save their babies from Paro, they did crazy things. And you know of Yocheved and Moshe Rabbeinu, and she put him in a basket in the Nile River, which if you step back and you think about it, you think that is crazy. Why would any self-respecting mother put her kid in a basket in the river? Why would you think that's a good idea? When you're desperate and you don't know how to save your child, you'll try anything. And that's how my mother got out on this Kindertransport. It's become one word. Kinder are children, like kindergarten, the garden of children, and transport, is transportation, is to move and to get somewhere. And the Kindertransport moved children from the countries in Europe where it was dangerous for them to live because of the Nazis. So parents would sign up in order to get their children out. England took the children in, but they didn't want the parents necessarily, maybe because they were afraid they couldn't help the parents. The parents would need to work and it would take away jobs from their countrymen, so they didn't want these foreigners coming in. The other piece might be that it's easier to ask the Nazis, let us save the children. The Nazis would acquiesce and say, okay, well, you can take the children. We can't have their parents, but you could take the children. They took children, babies, all the way until about 17 years of age. So my mother was on this list originally that came from England. She had to go across the English Channel, which is not very long, but in the time in 1930s, the only way to go was by boat. And my mother went on trains through Europe and got on a boat to England. And I have a picture here that you can see of a statue, and you notice that there are children on the statue with suitcases, and they have blocks all around it naming different cities that children came from, and they left those cities, they left those homes, and then they all went to England. I don't know if you guys remember when you were in the ELC, they gave you a necklace with your name and your bus and maybe your teacher's name, so that when you got into school, they could direct you to go to the right place. So on the Kindertransport, every kid had a number. And then when people came to pick you up, they would say your name, and their name had a number, and then they could connect with you. Now, you all know Paddington Bear. Paddington Bear was written by the author Michael Bond, and he saw the children at the railroad station, and they looked very forlorn, and he said he never saw something so sad as all these children without their parents and all alone. And Paddington Bear was modeled after these refugee children who came into England. My mother had a special connection to England because her father had a PhD in philology, which is a study of languages and where they come from and how they develop. And he was very interested in the English language, and he always had my mother have an English tutor because he felt English was the language of the world, and you need to know English. It's a very important language. So he studied in England for a year. And he lived with another Orthodox family in England, and they always said, we're always here, anytime you want to visit. Unfortunately, this was not the way they wanted it to be, but her mother wrote to them. They were able to give an affidavit. Affidavit, it means that they promised that they would be in charge of her when she came to the country. They telegrammed my mother's family and told her, your name, Eva Rose Blach, is on the list. So they were very happy, and my mother was preparing. And then when they saw the list in Germany, when it came out, her name was not on the list. So my mother, who was very strong-willed, she said, I need to get on this. I was supposed to be on it. So she dressed herself up. She put on a hat. She put on like fancy dress. She put on heels. She made herself look older, like a young lady. And she was very tall for her age. And she was slim and she was pretty. She also had light brown hair and she had blue eyes, which was very important at that time because the Nazis thought, oh, if you're Aryan looking, which is blonde hair and blue eyed, then you must be perfect and you are amazing. So my mother had these very blue eyes. So when she walked in the street and she was not wearing anything identifiable as a Jew, they thought she was a beautiful German lady. And she went to the Gestapo office. The Gestapo were the ones in charge of all this stuff, and the Gestapo were the really scary police. You did not want to meet up with them. You did not want to talk to them. You wanted nothing to do with them. But she had to go there in order to talk to the person in charge. So she said she remembers when she went there and she was all dressed up. She was walking up the steps and another Nazi officer was coming down the steps and he kind of put his arm out like, make way for the lady, and like to give her, respect. And she said, like, if he only knew that I was Jewish. Of course, she didn't say anything. And she continued upstairs. And when she got upstairs, there was an office she was told to go to. She went in and she held herself very straight and erect. I'm sure she was nervous, but the way she told it, she said this was going to happen. She was going to make it happen. And the guy looked at her and said, you're supposed to be on the list. And she said, yes, here is the list that we got from England, and I'm on the list. And he said, bin Judah, just bin Judah. And she said, yeah, in German, yeah is yes. And he just looked at her, and then he just took a pen, and he just signed the paper, and he said, okay, you're on. I believe it was the last Kindertransport before the war. It was in 1939. The war broke out in September. And she landed on February 2nd, 1939 in England. And she had to then live with whatever family they set her up with. Unfortunately, the family wasn't kosher. They were not Shomer Shabbat. So that was very hard for my mother. And then she asked to be placed somewhere that was Orthodox, where she would be more comfortable. And one of the things they provided you was not just room and board, but they also provide education. She convinced them at 17 years old that it would be cheaper for them to let her work, and she had to get special permission. So they gave permission for her to work. And then two other friends who were a little bit older than her, they had an apartment and they allowed her to join the apartment. So it was 3 girls in the apartment, and that way they could split the rent 3 ways. So this way it wasn't so much money for each of them. During the war, all the money and all the effort, they had to go to feed the troops, to help the soldiers, and people were always doing things to help the war effort and to raise money and things for the war. Food was rationed, so you only got a certain amount of flour every week. You got a certain amount of sugar every week. You got a certain amount of eggs every week. So my mother was always very into baking, and my mother would tell me how she would save up her eggs. She would get one in the beginning of the week, and then at the end of the week she would get another one. She would save up her eggs till she had 2 or 3 eggs, and then she would bake a cake. Like for Shabbos, they would have a nice cake. Like it would make her very happy. And obviously it would also make her roommates very happy. She didn't end up getting a visa to come to the United States till 1946. I do want to point out one thing. The Germans had decided that every Jewish woman would have the name Sarah added to their official papers. So on my mother's passport, it says Eva Rose Sarah. Okay, her name was not Sarah. Her name was Eva Rose Blach, but her passport said Sarah, S-A-R-A, on it. For boys, they added the name Israel. My father-in-law, his name was Yisrael David, Israel David. Our son, Yisrael David, is named after him. And we always wondered, would they add on the name Israel if your name was already Israel? My mother was an only child. She had no brothers or sisters. Her mother was killed by the Nazis. They could not get her out. She was taken to a concentration camp and she was killed. They say anyone who takes a life, it's like taking a whole world. Think about the whole world and think about all those people that were lost because of what the Nazis had done. We are 5 children. I am the youngest of the children, and I have 7 children. One of my sisters has 7 children, and my brother has 4 children. And a lot of the children are now married, and a lot of them have children. So there are now, at this point, I would say my parents have more than 50 great-grandchildren.